we're very lucky to have with us Gary Collins. He's going to speak on his opportunities and musings on an international legal career, which gives him a lot of scope to do pretty much whatever he wants. But the reason that I'm particularly delighted to have him here is, in addition to being somebody who has had a very interesting international career, he's a graduate of the University of Baltimore. And I think for students of the University of Baltimore, it's particularly interesting to see graduates of the University of Baltimore and what they've done with their careers. So, Gary, you're really kind to come see us here. He's come all the way from Italy just to talk to you, bringing some of his family with him. And thank you also for, during this trip, allowing him to come talk to us. So, welcome to the University of Baltimore. I give you the floor.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank Tim Sellers and the University of Baltimore for inviting me here. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you in an open and a frank way, and I thought the best way to start off was to tell you about myself. Like you, I went to the University of Baltimore. It was a long time ago, unfortunately. It doesn't seem that way, but I graduated in 1987. Lived on the corner of Tyson and Reed Street up in Mount Vernon. And I sensed a bit in Tim's opening that there's something similar to what I experienced when I started school here in 1984. I came from Virginia. I was born and educated in Virginia. And back in those days, University of Baltimore we had a certain sense that, well, you know, we didn't go to Yale or Harvard, so UV, and we're not even at the level of Georgetown or the University of Maryland, but you know, it's a law school, so we've arrived in law school. Let's see what we're going to do from there. That was very much the sense I had, and when I was going through law school, I had no idea what I was going to do. I was always interested in criminal law. I did a clerkship at the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Baltimore. My plan was to do criminal work, probably working as a prosecutor, because it seemed to me that there were some definite paths for law students and then lawyers here in Baltimore and Maryland and really in the United States. I was going to work for the state, maybe then work for the federal government as an assistant U.S. attorney, get some experience under my belt, then go to a private law firm, probably do criminal defense work, make a little bit of money, and I don't know, just get married, have some children, die eventually. That's the trajectory that I saw for myself. What changed it was the fact that I had always had an inclination that I wanted to live abroad. When I was at college, I did a summer abroad in Quebec, Canada. I was studying French. I was a French minor and a history major. So I drove my VW Beetle from Winchester, Virginia, up to Quebec City, and went to school at L'Université Laval, and I loved it because I was a foreigner. I was studying French, and I've always been very good with languages. So it was an exciting time. Came back, went to law school. At the end of my first year at the University of Baltimore, I was accepted as an intern for the U.S. Army for an internship with the JAG Corps. And what motivated me to go was going to Europe. I knew nothing about the Army. I knew nothing about the military. Back in those days, people didn't know what JAG was. There was subsequently, this TV series, so now it's much more familiar. So I went to Germany and spent a summer and had a great time. Learned a little bit about criminal defense work, worked with some great people. Came back, did my second, third years, took the bar in 87, July 87, graduated in May 87. Then worked as a bicycle messenger for Magic Messenger Service here in Baltimore, the first messenger service in Baltimore. 10, 12 hours a day in the saddle, eating boatloads of pizza, and just biding my time, hoping that I passed the bar. If I passed the bar, I was going to go to the Army, because I applied, and they guaranteed me going to Germany. And I'm going to have to speed this up, so bear with me. I went to Germany after doing the basic course in Charlottesville, Virginia. I always had an adventurous spirit, so they offered airborne school at Fort Benning, Georgia. And I volunteered because I wanted to get something on my uniform because we felt naked, which is what is called the rainbow ribbon, which is graduating from the basic course, which is nothing. If you're litigating, and that's what I wanted to do, I wanted to try cases. I wanted to be either a prosecutor or a defense attorney. It's important when you're in front of the members of the jury, which is members of the panel, which is what the jury is called in the military, that you have something on your chest. If you have a Ranger tab or Special Forces tab, even the better. It gives you more credibility, or at least I thought. Went to Germany. I worked doing legal assistance work, which is contracts and divorce work. As a first lieutenant, promoted to captain, took the job as a trial counsel, as a prosecutor. And then because I went to airborne school, I went down to Italy, to Vicenza, Italy. There I met my wife, who was working as a translator for the American commander. We got married in Italy. I was stop lost. We went to Iraq for the first Gulf War, which was a big shock to me because, you know, going into the military, the primary reason I went into the military was I thought nothing's going to happen. We hadn't had a war in the United States since we got out of Vietnam. So it was really, and here at UB, a lot of the guys were going into the Navy who were former naval officers, and then they went in the Navy JAG, and it was considered safe. I went off to Iraq. We went to northern Iraq for the Kurdish refugee crisis. And there I was assigned as the liaison officer for General J. Garner to UNHCR. I had no idea what UNHCR was. I don't think I even knew what the United Nations was. I had a vague idea. So as the judge advocate there for the airborne battalion, I was working with UNHCR officials in northern Iraq, and I thought it was a pretty good job they had. And most of these people were legally educated. There were very few Americans, a lot of Europeans. Left the Army, went back to Italy. At this point, once I got back, my wife became pregnant with our first child, Luca, who's sitting here. So Luca was on his way, and like everybody here, I had to earn money. I had a family started, so I got a job with an American law firm in Milano, an Italian-American firm doing corporate work. Articles of incorporation, contracts, just your basic bread and butter stuff that any lawyer would do. But it was all about bringing money in. We were smack dab in the middle of Milano, right by the cathedral. It was a beautiful law firm. From the outside looking in, I had arrived because nobody in the JAG Corps had successfully gotten a job in the host country. And there's a lot about this, but I'll brush over it, except to say that at a certain point, I was getting nauseous coming to work. When I got to the threshold of the law firm, I was nauseous about the idea that I had to keep a timesheet. I was obliged to go to all these functions at the end of the day, because it's all about getting clients. It's all about bringing the money in. And I thought to myself, this is not how I want to spend the rest of my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I definitely didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go around to cocktail parties in Milano, ask people for their business card. If you're an artist struggling, get out of my face. You're wasting my time. If you're starting a business, I'll take you to lunch and then hopefully bring you in as a client. I saw an ad in the Herald Tribune for legal officer West Bank, and I applied. So my first job, international job, real international job, was with the United Nations. This was back in 1992. I worked in Jerusalem. And I was working for a UN agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. UNHCR takes care of all the refugees in the world. UNRWA takes care of the Palestinian refugees. And I worked there for 2.5 years as legal officer, primarily doing work with privileges and immunities. And I didn't know what privileges and immunities was. The law school was across the way. We had no international law program. It was basic contract, civil procedure, so I felt sort of out of my element. But my attitude was always, privileges means if it's written down, I can learn this stuff. That's the one thing you have as law students, as lawyers. You can read and you can comprehend. So I had to make a major effort to start learning things that wasn't taught in law school, and I have no misgivings about that. I think that's fundamental. If you want to be a decent lawyer, a professional lawyer, you have to look at your legal career as a lifelong learning experience, because it definitely doesn't end when you graduate or pass the bar. It's just beginning. Stayed in Jerusalem, working with a lot of issues about the politics of the Middle East. For instance, I used to have to visit our local staff, and in the West Bank we have about 4,000 Palestinian staff, ranging from cleaners to doctors, teachers. Gaza has about 3,000. And the Israelis often had a lot of our local staff in prison for illegal activity, to include belonging to illegal organizations. In those days, Fatah was an illegal organization, Hamas was just getting started, but you've got a whole alphabet soup of other organizations out there. The PFLP, the DFLP, and UNRWA staff were active in politics. They were active in the resistance. So my job was to go to the Israeli prisons, from Kitziot, which is in the north of Israel, all the way down to the Negev desert. And there's a women's prison near south of Tel Aviv. My job was to go to assess whether the staff member was being held, and whether the purpose for holding the staff member was a violation of the UN's privileges and immunities. Because in privileges and immunities, if you have a diplomatic passport, you're not necessarily exempt from all things, all criminal acts. There are diplomatic agents that have full immunity, and then the UN, most UN staff who have UN laissez-passer, travel document, they are given functional immunity. So within the scope of their work, they're immune from all forms of legal process. But if it's Saturday night and you go down and you rob a grocery store, that's obviously outside the scope of your employment. The work was really interesting. We had a daughter in Jerusalem, Hannah, in Misgav Ladach, which has caused trouble later when we moved to Lebanon, but I'll get to that in a minute. So now with 2 children, a wife, I was given a reimbursable loan to DPKO, which is the Department of Peacekeeping Operations based in New York, to go to Zagreb as a legal officer. In Zagreb at that time, this is 1994, UNPRFOR, we had the war in Yugoslavia going on. So we went, usually what we do is I go first, I start work, I get an apartment, I whistle, my family, either I come and get them or they come and live with me, and we usually spend 2 or 3 years in one place. Zagreb with UNPRFOR was in terms of the professional work, was very satisfying, interpreting Security Council resolutions as they relate to United Nations protected areas in the former Yugoslavia with regard to rules of engagement. I was the rule of engagement legal officer for UNPRFOR. So I got to go out and meet with members of the force who were the Blue Helmets and give them classes on rules of engagement. And this was intimately tied up with the political situation because there were 2 schools of thought in UNPRFOR. The Special Representative of the Security Secretary General, the most senior UN official, was a Japanese diplomat by the name of Yasushi Akashi. Mr. Akashi strongly felt that force was to be avoided at all costs. Some of us felt that the difficulties we had in the former Yugoslavia, because our job primarily was to deliver humanitarian assistance to the displaced and the refugees, not just in Bosnia, but in some parts of Croatia. These UN trains with tanks and 200 soldiers armed to the teeth would usually be stopped by 1 or 2 Serbs, paramilitary, each with an AK-47, and they were standing on the road, and they would just block the whole line, and they would tell them to go back, and they would go back home. And we proposed to the SRSG that through the rules of engagement that we've been given by the Security Council, and in the United Nations, the Security Council dictates everything that the peacekeeping operations do. It's filtered through the Department of Peacekeeping Operations. What we would do is we would use the rules of engagement to our advantage. And that is to say, in a situation where you have a paramilitary, say Serb because it usually was, but it could have been Bosniak, these are Muslims or the Croats, they have no right to stop UN convoys from going about their business. With Security Council resolution, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. We should ratchet up the pressure on the people stopping the convoys. And if the peacekeepers feel threatened in any way, they have the right to resort to lethal force. So it's a last resort, but nobody has the right to stop a UN convoy from doing its mission, which was primarily to deliver humanitarian assistance. This was an issue that was batted back and forth amongst capitals, Washington, London, Paris, and New York. At the end of the day, though, the takeaway from this is politics really runs the UN. The legal arguments really hold little water. The political decision is the most important, and often the political decision was made, and then they come to you as a legal officer and they ask you to construct some type of legal argument that will allow them. And in fact, that's what lawyers are supposed to do anyway. You service the client. I went from there to Antas, which is Eastern Slavonia, again as a legal officer. And then in 1998, I decided to leave the UN because I was feeling, well, actually the primary reason was at the end of the UNTAS mandate, I was flown to New York for consultations. I was told, congratulations, you're going to be the legal officer in the Central African Republic. I speak French, and I was going to live at a French military compound in the Central African Republic. And that was the only thing on offer. So I said no. Children were still young. And I also felt a little bit constrained by the UN. The United Nations is a bureaucracy like the State Department or any other organization. And sort of like the law firm I was working in Milano, people think, you work for the UN, it must be great. On a day-to-day basis, it's not so great at all. And a lot of people working in the UN would love to leave, to jettison. I went from UNTAS in Eastern Slavonia after I left to work as the legal advisor to Bill Walker, who was a former ambassador, U.S. ambassador to El Salvador. He was the head of mission of the OSCE Kosovo verification mission. And again, the legal work was privileges and immunities, dealing with the Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs about our diplomatic status, but also more and more working on human rights issues. OSCE KVM, Kosovo Verification Mission, was in Pristina and throughout Kosovo to monitor the human rights situation. As you remember, or maybe you don't, back in those days, the Serbs were getting shot by Albanian paramilitary units, and the Serb police and army were shooting back. So we had a nascent civil war. OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is based in Vienna, was sent in with the contingent. And the difference with OSCE contingent and the United Nations is people working for OSCE generally are seconded by their government. Meaning, as an American citizen, the US government, the US State Department sent me to OSCE. They gave me a US diplomatic passport and they paid my salary, and I was working for the US government. And in the same way, we had Russians, we had people from all over the OSCE picture, Ukrainians. That mission went south. In March 1992, we got the order to evacuate. NATO would begin bombing. So I was told I had 5 kilos of goods, and we were going down to Macedonia. Macedonia, the plan was that we would disband. But the order never came. I started negotiating with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Macedonia for some type of status for all the OSCE KDM staff in Macedonia, but then all these refugees started coming in. They were primarily ethnic Albanians, but there were also a lot of Rome, also Gypsy coming out of Kosovo and southern Serbia. What we decided, because we didn't have a job, and a lot of our translators from Pristina came into Macedonia, we formed small teams and we went out to the refugee camps. I picked this refugee camp called Stankovac 2, and we just went around and asked people, so how was it? What happened up there? And in many ways it was very surreal, because you could go to a hill and you could see the line of refugees coming from Kosovo into Macedonia, bedraggled and dirty and scared, a lot of them. And they were harassed by the Macedonians. First they were harassed by the Serbs, so by the time they got to Macedonia they had no money. Everybody was shaken down. But we started hearing things in the refugee camps that amounted to war crimes and serious violations of human rights. So we started to write these things down with the Albanian translator. The Macedonian government has a substantial Albanian population. They did not want any trouble from their ethnic Albanians. So the Kosovar Albanians were kept in the camps. I took an apartment in the city, and the Macedonian government did not want us to talk to the Albanian refugees about any human rights violations caused by Serb troops or Serb paramilitary units. They wanted to keep relations with Serbia good. So secretively, at night we would go to one of the few hotels in Skopje, Macedonia, called the Alexander Palace, also called the Ali Pali. And we would give our notes to the investigators from ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And we would get debriefed about certain things. And sometimes the investigators said, that sounds really good. Well, not good, but in fact the worst, better for them. But they wanted us to go back and follow up. So that we did. That lasted until July of 1999. I went to Sarajevo. Then I worked for the Office of the High Representative. The High Representative of Bosnia is the international representative. And I would say, overall, that was probably my most interesting job. It was also, as an aside, the job that paid me the least. Unfortunately, it always works out that way. But I was in charge of property law issues at the Office of the High Representative. My task was to ensure that the DPs and the refugees from Bosnia were able to return their homes, their pre-war homes. What had happened during the war was that when the population started to move, homes that were vacated were taken over by members of the ethnic group of that village or that town. And the government often sold these houses or apartments to the people that moved in. In short, what we had to do was we had to rewrite all the laws in Bosnia relating to property, and that we did. I formed a team with UNHCR, OSCE, and a couple of other smaller organizations, and we completely redrafted the laws of Bosnia to make it airtight so that former residents or homeowners could reclaim their property if they wanted to. And we put into the law, you might wonder, well, how could the province got to pass it? No, that was the great thing about working for the High Representative. He could, by fiat, impose his own laws, or he could repeal laws. And there was a restitution law that I was against later on that he rejected as well. So we put penalty provisions in the law, meaning if you fail to comply with the regulations, you as the local municipal official, you can be fined, you can be fired, and you can be put in prison. After we drafted the laws and they were passed by the High Representative, I was tasked to go around Republika Srpska in Bosnia and teach these municipal officials about this new law. And this was like pulling teeth, because they did not want Muslims and Croats to come back into their cities. And I would always tell them, I would point out the penalty provisions, and I said, as an aside, I really want anybody here who knows of a Serb official who's not complying with this law to let me know, because my boss wants to put somebody in jail. And that did have a big effect. In Bosnia, a lot of the refugees and DPs came back to their pre-war homes. After OHR, we went to Belgrade. I worked with USAID first I worked with OSCE as the head of human rights and rule of law for Yugoslavia, based in Belgrade. Then I ran a project for USAID on drafting legislation on bankruptcy law and things that I'm really not that interested in, but honestly, I left for the money. There was a point in my time that they offered to almost triple my salary, and I said, yeah, I went. And however, I'm glad I'm here to tell you this. That was the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. That was a job where I was not professionally satisfied. I was not happy with the switchover from what's a fairly benign organization to USAID. I went for the money, and it was a huge mistake. If I could go back, I wouldn't have done it. So you can benefit from my experience. The time at USAID finished up there. Then I went to Bangladesh with Danita, Dhaka, Bangladesh. Very few tourists go to Bangladesh, and I can tell you why, having lived there for 3 years. Again, took the children, and the children are going to American schools in Bosnia. They went to a Turkish school. First year they went to a French school because there was no English school. So I'm dragging my family around. It was like the Beverly Hillbillies in going from post to post. So in Bangladesh, I was working for the Danish government, for Danita, and Danita is similar to USAID or DFID for the Danes, working with judicial education. So I was assigned to the Judicial Administrative Training Institute in Bangladesh, helping the Bangladeshis form a good academic program for the judges, and also some continuous judicial education. And I taught human rights law and gender issues to Bangladeshis. Post-Bangladesh, we went to Lebanon, to Beirut, and there I was working with, again with USAID. That was a couple of years doing some judicial reform where children were, Luca graduated from high school while we were in Beirut. Our daughter Anna finished 11th grade. We finished in Beirut. We went back to Italy because I'm based in Italy, near Milan. And then I went to Afghanistan, back with the UN. I took a job with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, which is based in Vienna. Relatively unique organization with the UN. Unique because the UN used to be very focused on issues about human rights law, refugee law. UNODC is very much based on police and drug enforcement. It's also project-based, meaning that when I arrived in Kabul in July of 2011, my boss told me, congratulations, you've got a team of 20 people, they're great people, but you've got no money to do anything. There's money for salaries. You have to go out and you have to find your own money. The criminal justice program that I was in charge of was focused on 3 things. 1, anti-corruption in Afghanistan. Can you imagine? 2, judicial and prosecutorial training. And 3, prison reform, with the focus on the vulnerable, especially females and juveniles. So that takes money. And I had to go around with my cap in hand to all the embassies in Kabul and collect money. It wasn't because I was very convincing, but I think I was at the right place at the right time. I ended up getting over $11 million in funding for our activities, and I think they're still living off of that $11 million now. Afghanistan, what can I say? Of course, the children and the wife stayed back in Italy. Every 6 weeks I would fly, I was entitled to fly home. So Kabul, Dubai, Milano, and back I've done more times than I care to remember. We stayed in a small compound, and the security restrictions were unlike any other that I've ever lived in. We had Gurkha guards. I call them Gurkhas, but they're really just Nepalese. They're simple Nepalese. They guarded the compound. Traveled by armored vehicle, but I did travel a lot. I saw a lot of Afghanistan because I was one of the few that really wanted to get out. I didn't like living in Kabul. Kabul is a bubble, and also that's where all the foreigners are. I had a feeling, I wanted to see the Afghans. I wanted to go out into the villages and see how these people live and sit down and drink coffee or tea. And, you know, if you're in Afghanistan, why not? And it's a beautiful country. I'm here to tell you that. Great people, and they say that once you've gone to Afghanistan, you're definitely coming back. And I can see why. Geographically, it's a spectacular country, and the people are just extremely warm. They've had a bad patch for the past 40 years, post-79 invasion by the Soviets. So in Afghanistan, so what can I say? Well, we were, security was a big issue, and the IOM compound close to the UNODC compound was blown up on a Friday afternoon. We work a Muslim work week, so Friday, Saturday is off. And I was standing in front of my window in my little room at the Park Palace guest house. And I say this a lot, that there is no park and there is no palace. And I was trying to decide what I wanted to eat for lunch. I just got out of bed. And then everything was black. And we have these, the windows are reinforced with plastic. And a hole came through the window, and all this hot air came in, and I was down on the ground, and I was hit in the leg by something, a piece of metal, and I looked up, and it was the door jamb. The door had blown off the hinges, and it was askew, and the door jamb came out. But in a situation like this, even though you're prepared, I've got my helmet, I've got my flak jacket under the bed in case, and we have drills all the time. My thinking was always, it will never happen to me. Honestly, if you could go, I mean, aside from, say, you know, going through CICL area with an Israeli flag flying, the chances of me getting caught up in a terror attack is 1 in a million. So I was never concerned about it. But it happened. The bombing was next door. There was a car bomb into the gate, blow a hole in the gate. 3 or 4 Taliban go through the gate, they start shooting RPGs and AK-47s. A young Italian woman was killed. Eventually she had severe burns. She was evacuated to Germany. She died 2 or 3 weeks later. I grabbed my telephone, a jacket, and we went to the bunker. And for the next 11 hours, we all sat in the bunker while outside we heard the shooting going on. And then that was it. Then it was over. They killed all the terrorists, and we come out, and everybody's shaken. It's 2 or 3 in the morning. And that was Saturday morning. Sunday morning, we go back to work. It's just a regular day in the office. So 3.5 years, it was probably a bit too long, I admit that, and getting bombed like that was not a pleasant experience at all. However, it doesn't take away from the fact that I still have a fascination with Afghanistan, the Afghans. And I can talk about the political aspects if you want. I can see I've already done one. Post-Afghanistan, I went to Beirut again. It was a quick tour, 6 months. Luca was in London studying, getting his master's. So was my wife and Anna. We stayed again in Beirut. I was working with the judiciary. It was eye-opening in the sense that wherever you go, there's an incredible amount of corruption. There's an incredible amount of human rights abuses. There's an incredible amount of bad things going on. I don't think we realize how fortunate we are living in the United States, and not because we're exceptional, not because we're better. It's just because there are other places that have very poor government. And that brings me to right now. I'm 54 years old. I have no idea what I'm going to do next. It's quite likely we might go back to Asia, but I'm taking a break. I came back to Virginia to see my parents and to relax a bit. That finishes. I didn't think I would take that long, but I obviously did. What I'd like to do is I'd like to stop now and take your questions. I don't have any final remarks, except to say this. If you get a job in international law, in the legal area, there are two primary areas. There's basic administrative law you can do. Every organization, whether it's NATO, the UN, OSC, requires people to take care of the admin stuff. I'm talking about procurement, human resources. Some organizations include privileges and immunities and that, but contracts, basic run-of-the-mill stuff. And you can work with the organization, you can travel, and you're sort of the in-house counsel. The second aspect, which is what I was most drawn to and what I've done, sort of the political legal. And there, you're dealing with human rights issues, you're dealing with rules of engagement, if you have a force. A lot of this includes strengthening the judiciary. The United Nations in Afghanistan is working a lot with strengthening the rule of law, and rule of law is a separate department within the UN now. Anti-corruption. Children's rights, because children have their own UN agency, UNICEF. Women's rights, women have their own agency, UN Women. And in terms of what's coming up next, gay, lesbian, transgender rights. This is something the United Nations has given lip service to, but unfortunately, because a lot of countries that we work in, like Afghanistan, like Iraq, Africa, these are issues that just don't go down well with the population. I think it's still going to take time. There is work being done in these areas, especially there was an opening with AIDS, but we still lag behind. I'll stop there and take your questions.
Well, I want to, since we have a slight pause, we have an opportunity to applaud, so I think we should do it. Thank you. And as we just heard, we have the opportunity to ask questions. So,
Yes, sir.
So you were bouncing around a lot from country to country or position to position.
Yeah.
Did you secure most of these opportunities just from looking around or through networking or internal vacancies?
I mean, that's a very good question. And in Italy, we live in Pavia. They have the University of Pavia, where my wife went to school, and they have a faculty of law. And I go to speak to, and the last time I went, I had, there were about 50 law students. But of course, in Europe, this is university level. It's not postgraduate. So these are people between 19 and 23. And I asked, who wants to be a lawyer again? And nobody raised their hand. And that's telling about the legal situation in Italy. For me, I fell into it. It was, and there's something that when I applied for the job, the guy who was the head of the legal office for UNRWA is from Sri Lanka. And he's an Oxford man, like his father and his grandfather, his great-grandfather. So he obviously comes from a very top of the top of Sri Lanka. When he found out that I was hired while he was on leave, he was not happy because he does not like Americans. And he didn't like the fact that I'd been in the military. He hadn't even met me. So you run into these problems. How to get started? You have to cast a wide net. There are websites, UN.org, they have you might be registered in the database. There's a couple of other websites, but just Google international legal careers, legal jobs. Networking, no, I didn't do it. However, that is done a lot, and I think it's done a lot more if you're coming from developing countries. I worked with a lot of people in the United Nations who came from their ministries of foreign affairs. And these people were golden in the sense that they could not be fired. We had the former ambassador of Yemen, who was a civil affairs officer in Croatia. He had been the Yemeni ambassador to the United Nations. And he was being eased out of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the United Nations is often a good place to park old diplomats. That does go on. It happens with OSC too. there's also the issue of your nationality. The one thing I want to say is if anyone has a second passport, it's probably better than your American passport. The UN is full of Americans, also full of Swedes and Norwegians and Italians and French and Brits as well. But there is a desire by international organizations to have a sort of balance of nationalities. What that means is if you are from Fiji, and Fiji is not represented, and they usually aren't, you stand, that's not going to get you the job, but it's good. It's a mark in your favor. The other issue is gender, because the United Nations is making an effort to promote more and more women. So if you're an American male, that's the worst. That's a reality, and that's me as well. So it's a struggle. However, I think that the cause is good, but it's a reality that you have to know. As an American, you should stay in close contact with the State Department somehow. The U.S. State Department has a division dealing with international organizations, and they will help you. They're not going to get you the job, but if you apply for a position with the United Nations or any other international organization, if you're shortlisted and you're the only American, they will weigh in on your behalf, and that's good. If you get to that point, and the United States weighs in on your behalf, that's a lot of support. Very few UN agencies turn down. It's not easy for a UN agency to turn down a request from the United Nations, but they're not requesting either. There's a note sent and they say, we support your application. Widen it and keep your expectations low. I think that 20-some years ago, it was a lot easier. We also didn't have internet, so everything had to be done by mail. Yes?
What was the biggest difference you noticed between foreign trained lawyers and the U.S. trained lawyers?
Non-American lawyers and American lawyers. That's a good question. Look, I'll speak honestly. The American lawyers are generally, and of course this is, I'm speaking with broad brushstrokes, American lawyers are generally very competent. Also, I can expect they'll be at the office on time, and a certain mode of behavior, which is sort of my behavior. However, we're not the best at all, and we're not the worst. It's not that there is a best. Certainly people coming from civil law jurisdictions like Italy, like France, like Germany, the thinking was, well, you know, these people are very sort of linear, and they say, okay, so the guy walks across the street, he's hit by a car, and he lost his book. There's probably something in the civil code with those facts, and that's it. That's sort of the classic example. That's the civil trained lawyer. Whereas the common law lawyer, we look and say, well, you know, the stare decisis, let's see if there's a precedent. That's not really true at all. What I found is, once you get into the international scene, your background in law, it helps you, but you really have to learn a completely new way of doing things. And we're all on the same level. I've worked with Russian lawyers, Japanese lawyers, a lot of European lawyers, and quite good, quite good. The other thing too is, what I tell my staff is, and I've hired a lot of people in my time, if you're working for one of these organizations, my assumption is you were the top of the top, because I know there's a lot of competition to get here, and the expectations are extremely high. I'm not sure. I deviated a bit. I haven't noticed that there's any country that has bad lawyers. I'll put it that way. I think there are countries, for instance, if you show me someone who has stellar, if they went to the best school in Japan, for instance, I'm already impressed. And I hired a Japanese lawyer to work with me in Kabul, and he met my expectations. It's quite good. Extremely sharp, hardworking. It's true too, now we're getting into cultural issues. There's some cultures that have a different thinking about what time they have to be at work, about how long lunch should be, about what time they have to go home, and things like that. But generally, UN staff, and I'll stick with UN, the quality is quite high.
Thank you.
Yes.
Were you at the U2 concert in '97 at the Kosovo Auditorium in Serbia to celebrate the end of war?
No. That was not, no,
It was
no,
pretty fun, apparently.
no, but I think I was in Belgrade at the time. No.
So you're taking a little break right now, but do you have any idea of like if someone was like, this is your dream next job, what it would be, what you want to be involved in? Because a lot of your positions, you were there during the like height of all of it, especially in Croatia and Bosnia, and curious if you want to go to Syria or do capacity building there for next generation or something.
I think that Syria would, that'll settle down one day. Not soon enough, but I think that would be a fantastic opportunity. I think that there's a good chance my son could go to a place like Syria, because he studied international affairs. It's also an issue of age. I'm 54 and I'm very tired in many ways. And I think my wife has a view on this issue. However, I'd like to go. Because what I like, I didn't go into this, but international legal careers, I have a lot of colleagues that just spent their whole life, their whole professional life in New York, Vienna, or Geneva. And that's it. Couldn't get them to go to the field. God forbid, Afghanistan or Gaza or someplace like that. And it's a huge issue right now in the United Nations. I was a staff representative, and the Secretary General would like to institute a mobility policy. So for instance, you can only stay in an A post, like New York City, for 6 years. And then you have to go out to the field for 2 years. And if you don't do it, then you won't get promoted. And of course, because they know how to motivate UN staff. For me, right now, I don't really know. I like living in Italy, and I feel that right now, I should have taken a break post-Afghanistan, but I didn't. I jumped immediately into Lebanon. So I'm taking that break now, seeing what comes down the pike. But I'm open, and I think that's the main thing. One has to be very flexible. In terms of, you are now, you're starting off. So people say, well, how do I get a job like that? How do I do it? You're going to have to be not only flexible, but you're going to have to take things that you thought you would ever take. It could be a job with no pay. It could be a job in an area where you can't drink the water from the faucet, where you can get all kinds of diseases, where there's security restrictions. But I think it's worth it. Anybody that takes a position in a field operation, even as a volunteer. I mean, I've seen people in Afghanistan that just got off the plane and they were hanging out, and within 2 weeks they got a job somewhere. It's certainly possible. This is up to you. A lot of this goes on your personality. I also want to say that generally, people that work in international careers, especially people in the field, less people that work in New York, Vienna, Geneva, as the land of fluffy towels, we call it. They tend to have very nice lives. They buy their own apartments. The children go to the international schools there. It's a normal life. People that live in the field, a lot of them are crazy. I'll tell you that. They really are. There's some nut jobs running around out there. But generally, the people are very open. They're very liberal. So I think we're a lot more like-minded. I've worked with. I remember being in groups when I was in the UN, and some Asian and African and European, and there's such a big mix. And we all feel more comfortable with each other than we do back in our homes. Because when I come back to the States, and I don't come back very often, since I left here 28 years ago, I've only been back about once every 5 or 6 years. So increasingly, as time goes on, I feel like a foreigner in my own country. I don't connect with Americans. That's the way it seems to me. I like this international environment because there is a lot of idealism. And I think they're genuinely really good people. Even the nuts are generally good. They're nutty in a positive way. These are people whose idealism is often unrealistic, because there's no way, for instance, in Afghanistan, we're going to make it so that women have equal rights. Not in my lifetime. Not in the lifetime of my grandchildren either. That's just not going to happen. Nevertheless, it's worth a try, and you've got to start somewhere. The other thing is, when you're working in the field, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is really what I wanted to do. I never wanted to go to Geneva or Vienna or New York. Not at all. Because, if I wanted that, I would have stayed in Milano. Working in the field, you meet the people, you sit down, and you see things that give you satisfaction. All the downsides of working in the field, and there are a lot of downsides. A lot of family separation, disease. I had typhoid in Afghanistan. It's basically, I've had a lifestyle where diarrhea is a way of life for the past 20-some years. So it's a reality. However, if I could go back and do it again, I'd do the same thing. But I wouldn't eat that falafel sandwich at the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem. It's a matter of what you want out of your life. I never wanted to change the world because I knew I couldn't. I was interested in doing something people-related. I never wanted to do tax law, I never wanted to do corporate law. Criminal law I liked because I liked the facts. Not that I liked what happened, but it was something that I could understand. Guy goes into a bar, gets drunk, beats up 2 guys, and now he's being prosecuted. I can relate to that because those are regular people. The tax code, I can't relate to that. Going into a country like Afghanistan, where the people there's abject poverty, and they don't know anything about what's going on outside of Afghanistan. They don't even know what's going on outside their village. So it's an opportunity to see the world on somebody else's dime, which was a major motivating factor, because I always wanted to travel. I wanted to study foreign languages. And if I can get somebody else to pay for it and give me a salary, that's great. Alhamdulillah.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So out of all the experiences, do you have one accomplishment that you're specifically proud of? Like, that was some good legal work we did together.
I am. And I'm glad you asked that, because I was going to say it and I missed it when I started rambling. When I was working with UNTAS, United Nations Transitional Administration for Eastern Slavonia, the SRSG was a man by the name of Jacques-Paul Klein. He's born in France, but he's an American. He's a former U.S. State Department official. And he was the SRSG. I'd worked with him a bit in Zagreb, and he asked me to come with him to Eastern Slavonia. Situation is this: Croatia, civil war with the ethnic Serbs against the Croats. The international community recognized all of Croatia, including the Serb-held areas, and the last holdout, because the Croatians took 3 of the 4 areas, was Eastern Slavonia, right on the Serbian border. Our job was to go in and reintegrate Eastern Slavonia into Croatia, and to make sure that the Serb population would stay there, because just across the border on one side is Bosnia, it's Republika Srpska, and then you have Serbia, the motherland. It's just across the river. And I told Mr. Klein, I said, after a few months, I said, look, and I lived with a family. I sent my family back to Italy. I was living with a Serb family in Vukovar, and Vukovar was completely destroyed. I don't know if you know, but the Serb forces completely wiped out the Croatian forces there. And even in my room, I had bullet holes through the lampshades and stuff like that, but I wasn't there at the time. So I told the SRSG, these people, because I'm talking with them, they're going to pick up and they're going to move. They're going to Serbia. I know because my landlords are going to move to Serbia. So they're afraid that they're going to be put in jail. Once the Croatians come into Eastern Slavonia, which was our job, we were going to, first we were going to have an election, which is a huge issue now, because everybody thinks we have an election in Bosnia, we have an election in Iraq, we have an election in Afghanistan, and then everything's fine, because then democracy works, and then we go home. That is so wrong. That is often the worst thing you can do is have an election, because the criminals that you were dealing with when they were paramilitaries, then they get elected to office and they have a suit and tie. So I said, what we need is, we need to somehow deal with this war crimes list that Zagreb, the Croatian government, is talking about. They say that they've got a list of something like 500 Serb men living here that are war criminals, but they won't release the names. So everybody's wondering who's on the list. And nobody's going to risk it, everybody's going to go. So I said, what we need is we need an amnesty law. And I explained to Mr. Klein what this was, and he said, fine. He said, you draft the amnesty law, but he advised me to get with some Serb and Croat lawyers. We drafted the law. I took it to Zagreb. I met with people at the Ministry of Justice. We went around to see parliamentarians. And the parliament, which is called the Zabor? Yeah, the Zabor, the Croatian parliament, passed an amnesty law. But I reviewed it, and it had all kinds of holes in it. It was no good. It was just too ambiguous. It was not good enough. So I went back to the SRSG. I said, it's no good. We need another one. Oh, it's difficult enough getting one law through Parliament. Can you imagine getting one amended? You're talking about serious usage of political capital. But it was no good. So I went back. I did. This is before they had the editing, the tracking changes. So we didn't. I don't think we had computers at all then. There was certainly no internet. So everything was done on paper, and I took it back to Zagreb, and I said, these are the changes that you need to make to the law. And they did. And the Security Council blessed it. Then my job was to go around, this is the hardest part, I was tasked by Mr. Klein to go around through Eastern Slavonia at town hall meetings and explain to the Serb population why this law is a good law and why they should feel comfortable and stay in Eastern Slavonia. And I did. I went to many, many town hall meetings, so just imagine hot, stuffy, Drina cigarettes, which are the stinkiest cigarettes you can imagine. They're hanging from the corners of their mouths. And what I heard from the people, from the Serb population was, why, first off, all the people in Yugoslavia, they'll give you a history lesson. It goes back, it depends on the ethnic group, the religious group. Either they start with the Ottomans or before. And they said, but why? The Croats, the fascists, the Ustashi, the Nazis, they're not to be trusted. Why should I trust this amnesty law? And I was at one town hall meeting, and this guy was going on, and it occurred to me, and I told him, I said, you do this. You take a piece of paper, and you write on that piece of paper, we lost the war. And you put that paper in your pocket. And every time you have this idea, why do I need this amnesty law, you read that piece of paper. Because that's why you need the amnesty law. You lost the war. And if you had won the war, then the shoe would be on the other foot. And we would be asking you to pass an amnesty law. So that did work. I mean, there were some people that went into Serbia and Bosnia, but I felt very, very good about that. And that was something purely legal. And for the vast majority of my legal career, the work that I've been doing has not been purely legal. Probably some of it legal, and some of it political.
Do you speak Serbian?
We're
Yes.
coming to the end
That'd
of
be great at language. Maybe how can you speak Serbian and Italian?
I was going to say, we're coming to the end of our time. I think what I'm going to do is make a couple of observations, give you an opportunity to correct my observations, and then we'll thank you. But my general observation about, I mean, the main thing I got from your remarks was a tremendous emphasis on figuring out who you are and what you want to do, and then trying to do it. Because I have had the experience of the experience you described in Milan, and I've had many students have this, many former students have this. People come back to me 10 years later and say, I hate what I'm doing. How can I do something that I like? And very often the things that they hate doing are things that they knew they would hate doing when they went into it, but for whatever reason they did it. So I think when you're planning your legal career, I think knowing who you are is important. You've described who you are. You're someone who loves to be in the place where things are happening, who love foreign places. Not everyone's like that. You may have been listening to think, oh gosh, I'm one of those fluffy white towel people. I think I'll be in Geneva. Know that about yourself.
Which is not bad.
Yeah, that's a pretty good
Nothing
life.
wrong with Geneva.
So know who you are and who you want to be, and then try to get it. And then I think the other thing we realized is that there are just many, many, many different routes into what you want to do, and particularly in international law, which is so protean. There are just so many ways to do it. And I think many people do get into international law, as you did, as I did, because we just think it's more interesting to be dealing with people from many countries. And so international law is law. It has an awful lot in common with other law. It's a certain type of legal practice. But I think many people are drawn to it because of this interest in being less parochial. And I think that's probably what drew many of you to international law. So it's something to know about yourself if you are that kind of person. And then the final thing I will say is just how you got into it, I think really was through JAG initially. And so that's something to bear in mind, that is one route in, because you get exposed if you're doing a certain type of, it doesn't matter what kind of work you're doing, but you're dealing with these international organizations in certain settings. And once you're dealing with international organizations, you start seeing the way in. And I think then once you're in, then you can have this, there are always all these different jobs. And if you're the sort of person who doesn't mind changing jobs often, you can have a fairly interesting life working for the Danes, working for the Americans, working for the UN, all these different possibilities. So they're just my observations, hearing you say what you said, and then you can correct or elaborate.
Simply that coming back here, if you had told me 30 years ago that I would be doing what I did, I would have, of course, I wouldn't have believed it. I wouldn't have imagined it. So life is long. Life is not sure at all. I'll finish with this. The main thing is you have to be willing to take risks. And there were many times in my career where I had something easier at hand, something sure, and I took the risk. And most of the time, the risk worked out. So in terms of going down the main road that the herd is going down, where when I was here it was, there were two, I can't even remember the names, but that was how society saw, and the law students saw you as you're good, because if you get a job at Piper Marbury or Venable Bacher and Howard, you were the best of the best. And I believe that too, and that could be true. But at the end of the day, you really have to be satisfied with yourself. And what Tim said is absolutely true. What he said is true. If you're not happy with your work, you're going to have a miserable life. There's no doubt about that. Having a legal career, you've got a lot of options. If you are a high school graduate, you need to focus on getting a decent job and putting food on the table. You have options, and there will be times when you can take a risk. I would say, don't be afraid to take the risk. Because you never know. It might be the best thing you've ever done in your life.
On that encouraging note, I think